So, just to give you an idea of what you're about to watch, at one point during this adventure, the party is completely separated. One of the characters just rolled a natural 1 on their first death saving throw. The character that came to save them just failed their medicine check. The third character disappeared into a side passage about 4 turns ago, and no one has seen them since. And the last character is effectively 1v1ing the big bad, but only has 4 hit points left. Honestly, I have no idea how they even managed to make it this far. Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be giving you a recap of my group's exciting playthrough of The Witch of Underwillow, a 5e adventure for 1st to 3rd level characters by Merric Blackman. I've also included a ton of useful links down in the description, including where you can purchase this adventure if you're so inclined, as well as a collection of maps, visuals, and other useful resources that you can use if you want to run this adventure for your own group. Before we dive into the recap, let me introduce you to our heroes. First, we have Cyrus, the human fighter, a hulking 7-foot behemoth who wields a massive great axe. Next, we have Derecho, the human artificer, an alchemist with a touch of water genasi blood flowing through his veins. Then we have Polo, the human bard, who channels her powers through art instead of song. And finally, we have Slick, a halfling rogue who's down on his luck and looking for his next big score. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into our recap. And I'm going to start with a roughly 30-second audio clip that I used as the opening narration for our game. Here we go.
You have been to better inns, but at the end of a long day's travel, this one is good enough. The fire is warm, the ale is plentiful, and the food is surprisingly good. A few merchants and their guards mingle amongst the village folk, and the innkeeper, who introduced himself as Imre Fekete, is very good at anticipating everyone's desires. Suddenly, the front door slams open, revealing a distraught young woman. "My daughter!" she cries. "They've taken my daughter!"
The woman rushed across the inn, into the arms of the innkeeper, her uncle. She sobs uncontrollably. Luckily, a few well-considered words from Derecho calms the young woman down. She explains that her name is Marika and that her young daughter has been kidnapped by a pack of wolves. Marika suspects that the Witch of Underwillow is behind the kidnapping. At the mere mention of the witch, the other patrons of the inn turn away in fear. But from a dark corner of the inn, a shady-looking halfling chimes in, asking what the reward might be for undertaking such a dangerous task. The rest of the group looks at each other, puzzled. They had never seen this halfling before. The innkeeper explains that he and Marika don't have much, but he'll give them his entire life savings, almost 100 gold, if they're able to return the child alive. The party converses amongst themselves. None of them has ever faced a witch before, and for good reason. "We'll do it," exclaimed the halfling, without bothering to consult with his newfound companions. "What? Don't look at me like that," Slick says. "You'll need my help if you want to take down a witch." The halfling was out of line, but he had a point. And just like that, the matter was settled. Not long after, Marika led the companions to her run-down cottage at the edge of the village. There, the party examined the scene of the kidnapping, and Slick was able to piece together what had happened. A pack of 10 wolves had taken the child and carried her off into the dark forest beyond. Luckily, the tracks were still fresh, and there was no sign of blood. If they hurried, perhaps the child could still be saved. I just wanted to pause for a minute to say that I hope that you are enjoying the recap so far. I plan on doing many more videos like this in the future, so if you don't want to miss out on those, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. But let's get back to our recap. And so, with night about to fall, the party set off into the dark, ominous forest. Before long, the wolf tracks led to a narrow path that went deeper into the woods. But something was wrong. They were being watched. 4 sets of glowing lupine eyes glared at them from the darkness, and moments later, the wolves were upon them. The battle was quick and brutal. When it was over, all 4 of the wolves lay dead, but not without cost. Cyrus felled 2 of the beasts himself, and was bitten twice in return. But Derecho took the worst of it, and would likely have perished if Slick hadn't skillfully dispatched the creatures from behind. After the battle, Polo patched up the party's wounds, and the group continued on.
Ahead, You can hear the sound of burbling water. Soon, a river flanked by overhanging trees comes into view in the fading light. A great willow tree dominates your view, and it seems that the trail leads to a dark hole beneath its trunk.
Fearing that they might be ambushed from behind by the remaining wolves, the group entered the hole at the base of the willow, and Cyrus used a large boulder to seal the entrance shut behind them. Cautiously, the party lit their torches and delved deeper into the darkness. From somewhere, just out of view, the sound of a woman singing could be heard. The voice itself was beautiful, almost enchanting, but the words of the dark lullaby being sung were anything but. After a short walk, the party found themselves at an intersection. Before them stood 3 ornate wooden doors. The middle door was magically sealed and possessed a glowing golden keyhole at its center. The doors to the left and right were seemingly unbarred. Polo and Slick entered the door to the left. On the far side of the room, there was a pedestal with something golden resting on top of it. But between them and their prize was a deep pit filled with hundreds of bones. A great root, only a foot wide, formed an unstable bridge to the other side of the gaping chasm. Slick, sensing a trap, prodded the root and found it to be sturdy. Satisfied that the bridge would hold her weight, Polo tied a rope around her waist and began to walk across. Unfortunately, the task proved more difficult than Polo had imagined. About halfway across, she slipped and fell into the pit, knocking the wind from her lungs. But, far more worrying, several nearby bones began to coalesce into the form of an animated skeleton. The undead creature lashed out at Polo, inflicting a nasty cut and nearly knocking her unconscious. Slick, thinking quickly, pulled Polo back up to the ledge just as another skeleton began to assemble itself in the pit. With inhuman agility, the skeletons climbed up the side of the pit, ready to attack again. Slick called out to the others for help, but he received no response. Meanwhile, Derecho had entered the door to the right. There he saw 2 large, armored statues, each with a golden key hanging around its neck. A pedestal between the statues bore a riddle. Derecho was a clever man. Surely he would be able to solve such a simple puzzle without assistance. After several moments of pondering, he arrived at an answer and proudly exclaimed the obvious solution. Unfortunately for him, the obvious solution was not the correct one. The statues suddenly sprang to life before his eyes and readied their weapons. Wisely, Derecho fled from the room, looking for Cyrus. He didn't have long to wait as the hulking warrior turned the corner, his axe already drawn. The statues slashed at Cyrus, inflicting moderate damage, but he cleaved them both down with 2 mighty slashes of his enchanted great axe. It was only then that the pair heard the sounds of battle coming from the other room. Polo and Slick were fighting for their lives against the reanimated bones, but the arrival of the other heroes was enough to turn the tide. After the dust settled, Derecho and Polo mended the group's many wounds, while Slick pondered the challenge of the pit. Cyrus shrugged, picked the halfling up, and tossed Slick as hard as he could. With a loud thud, Slick landed on the other side of the chasm, only inches away from falling in. Slick got up, dusted himself off, and examined the golden object intently. It appeared to be a key, or at least half of one. After a thorough investigation of the area, Slick could not find any visible traps. All the same, he decided to replace the key with another object of equivalent size and weight. His dexterous fingers made quick work of the difficult task. Meanwhile, Derecho made his way back to the statue room and, after a thorough investigation, discovered the location of the other half of the key. After being brought into close proximity, the 2 halves of the key magically combined. The witch was no doubt waiting behind the very next door, and the party's resources were all but spent. Still, the sounds of a crying baby and the witch's wicked lullaby drove them onwards. So Derecho put the golden key into the lock and turned. What the party saw next was not what they expected.
The witch's lair is full of clutter, with the true dimensions of the room being lost behind rows of freestanding shelves, tables, and piles of things both valuable and strange. You hear the sound of crying coming from a nearby crib. The witch herself stands behind a table upon which several vials are piled. She has long auburn hair and is dressed in a grey woolen robe. Nearby, a large wolf studies you intelligently.
An attempt at negotiation was made, and a deal was very nearly struck, but anyone paying attention would have known this was only going to end in violence. The heroes cursed the witch's sudden but inevitable betrayal. In an instant, the room was plunged into darkness, and the witch's lullaby grew louder and more intense. Polo and Slick instantly fell into a dark and fitful slumber. The giant wolf leapt across the room, sinking its fangs deep into Cyrus's leg. The hulking warrior returned the blow, but it was not enough to fell the vicious beast. The witch, seeing an injured Polo asleep on the ground, began to cast an acid arrow at the bard's direction. If the arrow found its mark, Polo would no doubt be slain. However, Derecho, spotting the spell just in time, dove in front of his companion, taking the arrow full in the chest. But it was a calculated gambit, his water genasi heritage rendering him resistant to the acid. The witch cursed, her plan foiled, and she ducked back into the shadows. Meanwhile, Cyrus finished off the massive wolf with a second swing of his mighty axe and rushed forward into the darkness. Over the next several seconds, Derecho roused Polo and Slick from their nightmarish slumber, and the party managed to severely injure the witch, revealing her terrible secret.
As the final blow lands, you notice that something is wrong. Very wrong. The once beautiful alabaster skin of the witch has begun to peel away, revealing sickly green flesh beneath. The hag curses, her secret revealed, and suddenly vanishes into a dense cloud of heavy fog. You hear the sound of a heavy wooden hatch being opened, and from somewhere far below, the sound of a crying baby.
After a brief pause to catch their breath, the companions resolved to delve deeper into the witch's lair, to destroy her, once and for all. The caves beneath the willow were dark and foreboding, and a cacophony of rushing water made it nearly impossible to hear. Slowly the party crept forward, Derecho in the lead. Suddenly, another acid arrow streaked through the darkness. Again, Derecho was struck in the chest, knocking him backwards. The spell had come from the top of a steep cliff just ahead of them, so the party rushed forward, attempting to scale the moss-covered cliff face. But even after several attempts, only Derecho and Cyrus found their way up. Slick disappeared into a side passage, creeping towards the sound of the rushing water to the east. From atop the cliff, Derecho tossed several of his fiery concoctions into the darkness, looking for any sign of the witch. Eventually, his efforts were rewarded as he spotted a rickety wooden bridge to the southeast. Cyrus surged ahead, the path forward finally revealed. As he ran across, the rickety bridge nearly gave way beneath his immense weight, but an extraordinary show of agility prevented him from tumbling into the murky waters below. From the darkness ahead, a ray of frost struck his arm, slowing his progress. Derecho, hearing the sounds of combat from the east, rushed over the bridge. But this time, the bridge gave way, and the artificer fell into the sickly green water below. He landed hard, hitting his head on the cold, damp stone beneath the water's surface. His vision darkened as he faded into unconsciousness, his blood mingling with the murky waters. Polo, not far behind, heard the splash and leaped down into the water to try and save her friend. Her first attempt was a failure. Derecho's wounds were too great. Alone, Cyrus rushed onwards, catching movement at the edge of his meager light. It was only then that he saw the witch for what she really was.
The hag stands before you, a wretched figure cloaked in shadow. Her skin is a patchwork of sagging, leathery flesh, cracked and oozing with something foul. Greasy hair clings to her skull in tangled clumps, and her fingers, long and gnarled like withered branches, twitch with unnatural energy. Her eyes, sunken and black as a moonless night, lock onto yours, filled with a malice that chills your blood. She smiles, a twisted, jagged grin that reeks of old meat and promises of suffering.
Cyrus steeled himself against the hag's horrific visage and charged forward. He brought his magical great axe down with incredible force, dealing immense damage. But the hag's counterattack was just as devastating. A terrible slash of her wicked claws nearly forced Cyrus to his knees. The hag cackled gleefully as she raised her claw yet again, this time to deal the killing blow. It would be a good death, a warrior's death. But it was at that moment that something streaked past the fighter's head. The hag cried out in pain as Slick's crossbow bolt pinned her raised claw to the cave wall behind her. It was all the time Cyrus needed. He held his massive great axe high above his head and brought it down in one final, devastating stroke.
The hag lets out a piercing, guttural wail as her body collapses in on itself, as though the very air has been pulled from her lungs. Her form crumples, brittle as old parchment, and a dark, oily mist seeps from her remains. For a moment, it clings to the ground, writhing and hissing like a dying flame, before dissipating into the cold, still air, leaving only the faintest scent of decay and a whispering echo that fades into nothing.
I told you that you'd need me, Slick said, smiling as he rummaged through the hag's belongings. And that brings us to the end of our adventure. Unfortunately, in a moment that echoes the end of our first adventure in this campaign, Derecho perished after failing 2 of his death saves, one of which being a natural one. This will no doubt have a profound impact on Polo going forward, as Derecho had just saved her life earlier in the evening, having intercepted the acid arrow that surely would have killed her. Ultimately, the party was able to recover Marika's baby before it had suffered any real harm. After investigating the hag's lair, the party discovered that she had planned to turn the baby into a hag daughter, with the intention of raising the child as her own. No doubt a truly terrible fate. After the companions returned to town and gave the child back to her mother, Polo laid Derecho's remains to rest, taking only a single memento to remember him by. The party remained in town for several days after that, taking some time to celebrate their victory and mend their many wounds. The following day, they continued onwards in search of their next adventure. And I should be doing a recap of that adventure here in the next week or two. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss out on that. If you are interested in running this adventure for yourself, there are a ton of useful links down in the description of this video. But I think that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Bye.